Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be changing out the brake pads and brake discs on this Citroen C4 Picasso. Now even if you don't have a C4 Picasso, it's worth watching the video as the procedure is very similar for most cars. To do this job we're going to need a jack and some jack stands, and the tools that we will require are a breaker bar, a socket wrench, some flathead screwdrivers, a 19mm socket, a 17mm socket, a 7mm hex bit, a clamp and a wire brush. And that's literally all the tools you're going to need to do this job. So we're going to replace these old brake rotors and brake pads with these nice new brake discs from Pagid and some brake pads from Eicher. Alright then, let's get started guys. First thing you're going to want to do is remove the wheel nut covers, like so. And next we're going to loosen off the wheel nuts while the car is on the ground. So I like to loosen off the lock-in wheel nut first, followed by the other nuts. Then once you've loosened all 5 nuts, slide the jack underneath the car and jack the car up on the jacking point right there. And then put the locking pin into the jack stand and slide the jack stand underneath the car, and then you can lower the car onto the jack stand. And now the car wheel is off the ground, so you can take out the bolts with a 17mm socket. I'm just using an impact gun here to speed the job up, but you can just use a standard wrench. Then remove the wheel. Now I just jump into the car and start it up, and I turn the steering wheel just to give me better access to the brake hardware. And as you can see now, I've got a better angle to work on the brakes. Next I get a large flathead screwdriver and put it between the disc and the pad, which is going to press that piston back into its housing. And now you want to go to the brake master cylinder and just take off the cap, as you're going to be pressing the hydraulic fluid back up the line. So get your screwdriver, place it between the disc and the pad, and then pry on it, and that will press the piston back into the housing. Next I get another flathead screwdriver and pry off the 2 plugs. This now gives us access to the brake caliper bolts that I've circled in red, which I will remove first, and then we'll remove the caliper bracket, which I've circled the 2 bolts in green. So I'm going to start by removing the bottom brake caliper bolt, which requires a 7mm Allen key.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day.
And go ahead and remove it. And here's the top brake caliper bolt. And let's remove that one too. Now I'm going to pry off the clip and remove the brake caliper, and set the caliper to one side. Now I've just set the brake caliper on a bucket for now, and the reason for that is I don't want to strain the brake hose, which I've highlighted right there. Now I leave one of the brake pads in the caliper just for a moment while I use my clamp to continue to press the piston back into the housing. Now I happen to be using a clamp, but you can use water pump pliers or a dedicated brake kit.
I think there's a reason though. Ups and downs just like every different season, yo. Sometimes I'm high, other times I'm barely breathing though. I always gotta fight and hide from the demons, yo.
And it's important to note here that you want the piston pressed all the way back into the caliper, which is going to push hydraulic fluid up the line. And this is going to allow you to have enough space in the caliper to accommodate the new brake pads, as they're a lot thicker. And so if we take a quick look at the old brake pads, you can see they're absolutely toast. There's hardly any brake material left on them. And if you compare that to the new brake pads, you can see right there all that brake material. So it's a good job we changed these out when we have. So now we need to remove the caliper bracket, so grab a 19mm socket and your wrench. And let's remove the top one. And now go ahead and remove the bottom one. There you go. And then remove the caliper bracket. And now the caliper bracket has been removed, we're going to want to remove the brake disc. So in order to do this, we're going to use a Torx 30-bit. And now I'm just going to set this caliper off to one side just to keep it out of the way. So I'm using a tie wrap, but you could use a bungee cord or whatever else you see fit. And again, this will make sure we don't stress the brake line too much, which I've highlighted at the bottom there. So now just grab a rubber mallet and I'm just hitting the brake rotor to try and remove it. Unfortunately, it seems to be seized onto the hub, so I'm going to have to try a different method to remove it. So what I've done here is just grabbed 2 nuts and 2 bolts, and I've put the bolt through the bracket and a nut on the other side. And what I'm going to do is get a wrench and put that on the nut, and I'll get a socket on the bolt and I'll just drive it through, and that will apply pressure onto the back of the disc and pop it off, just like that. Now that we've removed the disc, I'm going to clean up the hub with a wire brush. And now I'm going to go ahead and apply some copper anti-seize onto the hub, and this will just make it a lot easier to remove the disc in the future. And we're just looking to apply a thin, even coat here. Then pop the disc back on. Then I get some thread lock and apply it to the hub screws, and then just screw them back in, and then just simply repeat the process for the other screw. Next, I'm just going to clean down the caliper bracket with a wire brush. And then just go in with a file where the brake pads sit, just to make sure that the brake pads will run freely. And we'll put some grease in there later on as well to help with that. So the next step is to put the caliper bracket back on now. And again, we're going to use some thread lock on the bolts. So I like to line it up and pop the bolts in by hand first, and then pop the bottom one in. And then go ahead and tighten these bolts down with your ratchet. It's a 19mm socket we're using here. And now the top one. And the next step is we're going to want to grease the brakes now. So I've bought a kit off Amazon and I'll leave the link in the description. It's a 3-piece set for the pad, the pin and the clip. So you're going to grease the back of the pad. Then you're going to grease the caliper pins. And finally you're going to grease the brake pad clips. So here we've got the grease for the brake clips. So just apply a little bit on each side. You don't need much at all. And I also like to apply some of the same brake grease into the channel where the brake clips sit. And this will allow the brake pads to move freely. This is the same area where we filed earlier on just to make sure it's smooth. And as you can see there, the brake pad should be able to move freely. Next, I also like to apply a bit of grease on the piston where the piston contacts the back of the brake pad. And I'm using the green pin grease here as this is a silicone, so it won't damage the rubber. And then I apply some more grease onto the clips for the other pad. And snap the pad into the piston. Just like that. And then I get the grease that's designed for the back of the pad. And apply a thin layer of grease onto the back of the pad evenly. And then you can position your caliper back on to the brake pads. And then finally we want to grease up the caliper pins. Again using the correct grease. And the best type of grease to use for these is a silicone based grease as it won't swell up the rubber. And push the pin in. I like to apply a bit of thread locker here as well. And then use a ratchet to tighten the bolt down. And then it's the same process for the bottom caliper pin. And again just tighten it down. Then you can pop the caliper spring back in. Pop the covers over the caliper bolts, one at the bottom and don't forget the top one. Then I get some copper spray and apply it to the front of the hob here. This will make it nice and easy to take the wheel off in future. And then you want to get some brake cleaner and make sure you give the discs a good clean. Now most manufacturers apply coating on their discs and this is to prevent the discs from rusting in the packaging, but you want to remove this coating to make sure your brakes are performing optimally. Now we're going to put the wheel back on the car. And again I'm just using an impact gun here just to speed up the process, but you can just use a standard wrench. And it's a 17mm socket I'm using here. And then finally I put the locking nut bolt on. And we don't need to tighten these up fully until the wheel is back on the ground. So then lower the car back onto the ground. And then go ahead and tighten the wheel bolts back up. And I've put the torque settings on the left hand side of the screen there. But generally I just tighten these down by feel. and then we tighten the locking nut down. And pop the wheel caps back on. And finally, just want to jump in the car and you want to apply the brake pedal a few times just to firm it up again. And that's it folks, that just about wraps up this video today. And as you can see, you can do this job with just a few basic hand tools. And hopefully this video will give you the confidence to go ahead and have a go yourselves. Have a good one and see you later guys.